Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And I'm Stephany.
And we're a mother and daughter who love reading and talking about books. The ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back in the Book Snug. I missed talking about books in our last episode, so it's good to be back. It's kind of a rainy day outside, so it's fun to be in the snug. Tonight we aren't drinking tea, though.
We are not. It's a drink I needed after my day.
What are we drinking tonight?
You were calling them mock mojitos.
Well, I guess they are because I didn't make them from scratch.
And there's no mint.
No, the mint.
But there's definitely
good.
Bacardi in here.
Listeners, we are not by ourselves in the snug tonight. We have a special guest because we are doing our second episode of 3 Peas in a Pod. Our special guest tonight is Mark Yoder. Welcome, Mark.
Hey now.
Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
And you are also joining in with the mojitos. So
I sure am.
I think we're going to
It's
have
Friday.
a happy discussion.
Yeah.
This is probably the book to be drinking a mojito with, in all honesty. At least for me.
So anyway, as I was saying, this is our 3 Peas in the Pod series. Our first episode we did with my mom. And what we do with 3 Peas in the Pod is we have a special guest pick a book and we all read the book together and then we discuss it. So Mark, like I said, is our special guest and he chose
Dune.
Dune by Frank
Sure did.
Herbert to read and discuss. And it has been quite an experience.
It has. How many times, Mark, have we asked you to change your pick?
At least 4 or 5 probably, but I was pretty steadfast. I wasn't going to let in.
Well, I'm glad I read it,
Yeah.
even though we were kind of gripey and complaining about it.
Probably more than we should have been.
Before we get into the show any further, Mark, why don't I let you introduce yourself? Well, first let me say, Mark Yoder is my oldest son, but my middle child, and he is Julia's oldest younger brother. So that sounds really confusing. It just means that there's a youngest brother in the mix too, but Mark is the middle. So Mark, why don't you tell us about yourself, whatever you want to tell us?
Sure. Am I 24?
You are 24.
Okay, I'm 24.
You've reached that age.
Yeah, I got married a little over 2 years ago to Lexi, and we were dating in middle school, high school, all that. Got married, so that was pretty awesome. And now we're just trying to figure it out and suffer through life, you know. So
Adulting.
yeah, adulting.
Welcome to the train wreck.
I mean, I hate that term. Everyone's like, "Oh, adulting." It's like, no, you're just suffering.
Yeah.
But
You are.
How many years did you and Lexi date before you got married?
9 or something like that. We started dating in 2014 or 2013, something like that. I don't know.
Do you mean dating?
Well,
or do you just mean hanging
together.
out together.
We didn't ever go on a date till high school, but we were together in middle school. So we count that for continuity's sake. But
Okay.
you get what I'm saying.
I do.
Yeah, other than that, there's not really much. I spend every second I can outside fishing or hiking. I'm really into fly fishing now, so my latest thing is tying flies. I've been spending way too much time doing that.
You should talk to Ben.
Yeah, but
Learning a new skill.
Yeah.
exactly. That's what it's about. But
Yeah.
other than that, there's not really that too much.
You even work outside.
Yeah, I work outside. That's my thing. I can't stand to be inside for too long. But
Yeah.
so that's a little bit about me. But
Okay. Do you have any questions you want to ask Mark, Julia?
Well, we're about to give him a whole list of questions.
We are, about reading.
Yeah.
Anything else you think our listeners should know about Mark?
Well, I think you have a science background. And
yeah.
Do
An
you think-
irrelevant science background.
True, but do you think that played into the pick of the book in any way? Without talking, because we're about to talk about the book, but
I don't know if I would say it played. So, yes, I have a double major in chemistry and biology, and I find I love science fiction, but I need science fiction that's either like, it has to be so unrealistic that there's nothing, like there's no connection between the universe we live in and that universe, or it has to be like scientifically sound. Like you read some books where people are doing things or they say things like, oh, that's just the quantum contabulator, and I'm like, that's dumb, and it ruins it for me, honestly. But I would say Dune is on the ends of it's almost too unrealistic to like, it almost makes its own science in a little bit of a way. Like there's its own universal laws of nature and stuff, which I think I find that attractive. Like I like that aspect of it. But so maybe that played a role.
Okay. I agree with you about Dune. I was thinking that it almost leans into fantasy hard.
Yeah,
like it's
definitely.
so far that way that it has a fantasy feel to it.
Yeah. I mean, there's some small aspects of science to it, but it's all like, it's all pretty unrealistic things. Like, but yeah.
Bringing water out of the desert and turning sand
yeah.
into like this lush green land.
Terraforming a desert planet with giant worms that are, huge. Yeah, the whole thing is, it's a little outlandish.
Yeah,
just a little.
So if you're not using your chemistry and biology degrees, what are you doing with yourself?
I am landscaping, I guess. I mean, we do mainly hardscaping. We build decks and patios a lot and stuff like that. I just enjoy, I went to school, did all the lab stuff, and just found that it wasn't, like lab days were the most miserable. Like I was always looking out the window like, man, I want to be out there, not in here doing whatever we were doing. So I just kept on doing that job, and it's been pretty good for me, and I enjoy it. I like being outside. I like working with my hands. I like building things. It's all good.
Okay. Well, we're going to move into talking specifically about who you are as a reader and the type of books that you like to read, and maybe some things that you don't like to read.
Sure.
So I have a whole list of questions. Julie and I are just going to kind of share back and forth the questions, just so we get a better impression of what you like to read and what you don't.
All right. I just need to put a disclaimer out here that I'm not quite I'm the least of the three book nerds here. So all of my opinions in this matter are, I don't really know what I'm talking about. So
you used to be a very big reader.
Yeah, I used to be. I feel like in high school and college, when you're just like forced to read not like nonstop things that you're not all that interested in, it just kind of like, I didn't want to spend my free time reading, so I kind of lost it. And I'm getting back into it now, but but still I feel like I lost a lot of time and
I think it's normal though to go through ups and downs like that in your reading.
Oh yeah,
when I had you guys as little kids, I hardly read at all because I was too tired when I had any free time to pick up a book and read.
Yeah. Well, and the same when you did your degrees too.
Yes, for the same reason that Mark said, you're doing so much reading and so much writing that you just don't feel like it.
You just want to veg.
Yeah.
But I do remember a time in your life, Mark, where we would put you to bed and you would
I'd stay
read
up and
under the covers when you weren't supposed to be.
Wasn't even under the covers. I was like,
just reading.
Yeah, come and stop me.
Well, and you and I, we would have reading parties. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we did that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I got way into it, and I would read like whole books in like 2 days in like fourth grade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then you grow up and you have all this other stuff to do, and it's like,
and then you have so many other things that you enjoy doing that you have to pick and choose.
Yeah, exactly.
How you're going to spend your time.
Exactly.
So, yeah. When you do read, what is your main motivation for reading? Do you do it for pleasure? Are you trying to learn something? Just curiosity?
I would say,
the main reason?
Honestly, it very much like I'll read a certain book for a certain reason. It's like I'll do it for all of them. Like I didn't read Dune to learn anything. I read Dune because it is entertaining.
Right.
But I read a lot of other books. Like I'm reading a book right now on back to fly fishing, Pennsylvania bug hatches, which is just all the different insects you find in streams and stuff. And that's like awesome. I love it. Like it has the Latin names when they hatch. It's everything about them. It's just like bug science, but it's fun.
Right.
I read another book about trees in Pennsylvania, which is all the species and everything about them and stuff. And that's obviously learning that to read or to learn.
Right. So knowledge.
Yeah. It's I'll be interested in certain books for certain reasons. So I would say mainly it's like knowledge or like, learning a new skill, or it's just something to read for entertainment. Generally those two.
Okay. If you could only read one genre for the rest of your life, I know you mentioned science fiction, but is that what you would read for the rest of your life?
Does it have to be one?
It doesn't. It doesn't have to be one, but are there a couple that you prefer over other types?
I would say I like genres that really lend themselves to creativity. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why I like Dune so much. It's the same with like the Lord of the Rings, and I like when an author creates a whole new universe, like a whole new atmosphere, like the amount of creativity that goes into that. So I would say my favorite genre is probably science fiction, but I also like fantasy too. I get into that a little bit, but
So I think a term you're looking for is speculative fiction.
Sure.
Anything that asks the question, what if? That goes beyond what the real world is and investigates that question.
Well, did you read The Martian?
Yeah.
So is that kind of along the same lines?
Yeah. But The Martian is fairly realistic. It's kind of like, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I would say
very sciencey. That makes sense.
Yeah, very sciencey. I would say nonfiction and then science fiction and or fantasy. But I'll read anything like historical fiction. The only thing I haven't really gotten into is like murder mysteries because I feel like they just get redundant. I'm like, I'm just not nearly that interested in them. But
you're breaking my heart.
I'm sorry.
So you answered the question I was going to ask. Is there any type of book or genre that you prefer not to read? And you just said murder mystery.
Murder mystery is one, and I haven't read a single like romance book, which may come as a shock to some people.
I don't think so.
Listen, the day that you pick up a romance book, I think hell is freezing over because that is so outside who I know you to be.
Yeah,
it would be a day to see. That's for sure.
So I'd say probably romance and murder mysteries are probably the two.
Yeah, not big shockers.
No.
Which is very weird. Like I love murder mystery movies and stuff, like The Glass Onion and that was
fun.
Yeah, I eat that stuff up. But part of that is just what's his name? Daniel Craig is just so much fun.
He is.
But yeah, like it's just in book. I don't know. I just get bored of it.
Maybe you just haven't found the right type of murder
maybe
mystery.
you just need to give me one to read and maybe I'll get into it.
Maybe you should try Evelyn Hardcastle.
Maybe.
Because that's the one where it's like Groundhog Day versus Clue versus...
Yeah, that might be interesting.
And that does have a speculative element, so it might be something you like. Yeah.
We'll see.
Or a murder mystery that involves science fiction, which there are those out there.
Yeah, that could be interesting. But then it's just give me a better story than like a whodunit scenario, you know? I don't know. Maybe I'm just thick, but maybe I'll have to give it a try.
Okay.
Sure. What for you is the most important when you're reading fiction specifically? Would you say it's the character development, plot, writing, or even if there's some thematic elements in it, so like themes or whatever the author's trying to say?
I would say for me, it's tough. It's either going to be plot or character development. I think character development's very important, but I think if you have great characters with nothing to do, then you have kind of a worthless story, in my opinion.
That's a good point.
I think plot is very important. Like you can have some, like, you know, so-so characters. Like, let's be honest, none of the characters in Dune are really like, you know, I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves here, but none of them are really like thoroughly developed. And I still love Dune, but it's because there's a very heavy plot, you know, and some themes and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say plot and character development are both pretty important.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite book? Is Dune your favorite book?
No, Dune is not my favorite book.
Okay.
But I don't know that I can really say that I have one. I have a lot of ones that I remember very fondly that whenever anyone would be like, what's your favorite book? I would always say Where the Red Fern Grows. That one was my favorite for a long time. Or I really loved The Art of Racing in the Rain, but it's been a long time since I read that book.
Yes, by Garth.
I don't know.
I forget who. We'll put the author in the show notes.
Yeah, I came unprepared. I don't know what his name is.
Fine.
I want to say like Holbrook or something like that, but I don't know.
We're always
I was going to say Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
And he's a country music.
Listen, if he wrote
country music singer.
I do not think it's Garth Brooks.
Any other favorites that you can remember? Really impacting your life? Okay. The Art of Racing in the Rain is a great book.
Cormac McCarthy books. I love Cormac McCarthy. Probably No Country for Old Men. I love that book too. It's not super impactful, but it's just I don't know, it's great. It's not for everybody, but I love that story.
Well, and that was one of the books that we were trying to get you to change to, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, because you could read it. You could read it in a day. There's there's no descriptions. There's nothing. It's just people saying yes and no the whole time.
Is that stream of consciousness, or is that actually written with dialogue? And
it's written with dialogue, but he has a very, I don't want to say lazy because I love Cormac McCarthy, but it's a very bare bones style of writing. Like he doesn't
spare.
Yeah, like he doesn't use quotation marks to like you just have to follow the story to know who's saying. Like it's a little hard to follow sometimes, but yeah.
So really, what he's focusing on is things other than the story, is what you're saying.
No, I think his main focus is the story.
Okay.
He doesn't hardly describe much. It's very, the other great thing I love about Cormac McCarthy. I don't know if you ask who my favorite author is or not.
That's coming.
But we're foreshadowing a little bit. One thing, he has a lot of different books that stretch a variety of different writing styles and cover a variety of different time periods, different settings. Like a lot of it's different. Like Blood Meridian is written very descriptively, like minimal dialogue. Pretty much the entire book is just describing the desert and then the things that have happened. But then No Country for Old Men is all like, this happened, someone said something, the next thing happened. It's very like, point to point.
It sounds like he does a lot of experimenting with structure, how he structures his stories.
Yeah, I would say that.
Interesting. Well, is there a book that you have recently recommended to somebody else?
I wouldn't say I'm someone people generally come to look for book recommendations. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's why you guys didn't want to read Dune. I don't have a very good track record of liking good books, but
well, I had a history with Dune, so I had a reason why I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
And my thing simply was I didn't have the time to devote to it to like read it in a way that I felt that I could.
Hey, but we did it. We're here.
We did. I power sprinted the other day trying to get it finished, but we're here.
Do you have a book that you would recommend?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot of books that I would recommend.
So what is one book?
I guess it would depend who's asking and what they want.
That's a good way to approach recommendations.
Yeah. I love a lot of classic literature. Classic science fiction is one of I love a lot of that stuff. If someone was like, just tell me a book that you read that like you loved that you think I should read, I would probably say 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Okay. Oh,
that
yeah,
would be
Jules
a great
Verne.
one for me. Yeah. That's my favorite Jules Verne for sure.
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah.
Did you read that?
Yeah, Around the World in 80 Days.
I enjoyed that.
I also liked, again, with science fiction. I'm a one-trick pony, honestly. But Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet.
Yes,
very highly recommended. It's creepy. It's a creepy book because he wrote it in. When did he write it? In like the 60s or the 70s or something like that. And he made all these kinds of like futuristic predictions, and a lot of them shockingly like came true in roundabout ways. It's a little, and the whole thing is based on like a dystopian future, or at least a future that like seems utopian to some, but then to others it's it's great. I would say that one too.
Okay.
Aldous Huxley is also great. Doors of Perception's another good one if you're into like LSD and stuff like that. Because
well, I hope none of us here are.
What a great stipulation.
In that book, he just takes LSD with some professor from, I don't know, somewhere in California, and it's just him writing about how it like altered the way he saw things. It was just like his day and how he saw basic things and how it was different to him.
Is Timothy Leary? Is he
that's
guy?
who it was. That's who it was. I couldn't remember.
The well-known
psychedelic
from,
guy. Yeah, I couldn't remember his name.
Loved his LSD.
But, yeah, as far as people asking me for book recommendations, I just feel like all the people around me read more stuff than I do, and so everyone knows what they want to read and they don't bother asking. I'm the one asking for recommendations, I guess.
Well, we've been spending a lot of time talking about good books you've loved. Do you have any books that you have not enjoyed or despised?
But the problem with me is I'm not a push through it kind of reader. If I start reading it and I'm like, I just put it down. I won't finish it. That's happened a number of times, but the one that stuck out with me that I did read the whole way through was The Hunger Games, and that's
I was
unpopular.
About to ask about that.
Yeah, it's an unpopular opinion, I guess, for someone that like I was in middle school and high school when everyone was
Yeah,
like,
we grew up
It
in
was
that
huge.
era.
Yeah, for sure.
I absolutely hated it. I just thought it was bad. But it's just my opinion.
You only read the first book, I assume. If you
but
didn't
I
like it.
read the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, I didn't like it. It was kind of like I guess it was sort of like a trend-setting book at the time.
Yes. I think it brought in the whole dystopian
It
focus.
did, I think, yeah.
Yeah. But it was not a good book to do that with. It just wasn't that good. But yeah, that's my opinion.
The next question is a book that you dislike that everyone else seemed to love. And you just talked about The Hunger Games.
Yeah, The Hunger Games, for sure.
Um,
And also, unpopular opinion, another one, unpopular at this table, is Harry Potter a little bit.
However, I am going to put a stipulation. You read it first, and I read the books
And
from
you
you.
loved it.
No, I loved it at the time.
it.
I loved it at the time. It got weird at the end, but yeah, I loved it at the time.
Yes.
But now I think about, you know what? I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that everyone else loved it so much that it got a little bit ruined for
We
me.
all
Yes.
have that in
Yeah,
us.
Yeah.
Like,
Even, I mean, I will even not read something or watch something if
if
a
everyone-
ton of people are all bonkers.
Well, that's
for
why
it.
I'm just now watching Game of Thrones, because everybody else
Well,
loved it 10 years ago.
I'm still holding out on Game of Thrones. I refuse to give in.
I just needed a big long form fiction.
Yeah.
So that's where we ended. However, it's same thing,
Yeah.
right, with the Harry
Yeah.
Potter. The next question then, to kind of piggyback off of that, is are you reading anything currently?
Yeah. I'm reading a book called Coyote America by Dan Flores, I guess is his name. It's a natural history of coyotes in America.
So it's a nonfiction.
Yeah, it's a nonfiction, but it's written in, can't remember what the term is. It's not like a textbook. It's like
Like narrative nonfiction.
yeah, it's a narrative nonfiction.
Yeah.
There you go.
It reads like really good fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and what about that is interesting to you?
Well, just the fact. Well, one, coyotes like a lot of people don't know, coyotes are not around where they are now. So like when people first came here, there weren't coyotes in Pennsylvania or Georgia, places where they're like wildly distributed now. They were in New Mexico and Arizona. They called them prairie wolves. That was the Indian term for them. And they just randomly dispersed all over the place. It wasn't like people picked them up and moved them for any reason. They just spread around of their own volition, which is very interesting. And they survived an awful lot. Like back in the day when people were farming things and whatnot, they thought coyotes were a bit of a nuisance, so they would try to kill them. So they would take a horse and they would shoot it in the middle of the desert. And before it died, they'd inject it with strychnine, and then all the coyotes would come to eat it, and they'd eat strychnine and die. But coyotes have this weird genetic evolution where when there's like pressure put on them, their litters get bigger. So the more you try to kill them, the more coyotes there are.
They're cockroaches.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Or
I mean, but they're cooler
rabbits.
than that,
No,
you know.
I agree, but the same premise.
Yeah, but it's a cool little natural history like story that not many people are aware of, that like coyotes spread around from a very small area of the country to pretty much everywhere just by like they're just a phenomenal survivor. It's a very interesting
It feels
book.
like a major FU. You're going to put pressure on me here. I'm going to make more babies.
Yeah,
You
I
know
always
what
thought
mean?
that's funny because you always see the things like they do them in like, I don't know, South Carolina and stuff, where they're like the big coyote hunt. They're like kill all the fawn killers and stuff like that, and people go out and shoot a bunch of them. And I'm like, that's great. There's just going to be more of them next year. You know.
So it sounds like you're enjoying.
Oh yeah,
And
no,
doing
I
the
love
book.
Dan Flores. He's written a couple other books that I thought were pretty good, but I can't remember what they are. American Serengeti. It's another natural history, but it's about what the continent of North America looked like in like the Pleistocene era, where like woolly mammoths and stuff like that were just rolling around.
Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'm currently reading.
Okay. Would you classify yourself as a once and done reader, or do you tend to reread things?
Once and done for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So even favorite books,
Yeah.
you wouldn't go back and reread.
No, it's because maybe it's just because it's too much of a time commitment. Like I can go back and rewatch a movie, and it's like, oh, it's an hour and a half, and
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe with the book, I'm like, there's so much other stuff to read. Why would I take the time to read one that I already know?
Okay.
You know,
So there probably isn't a book at all that you reread.
I don't think in my life I've reread a single book.
Okay.
That's really interesting that you say that you rewatch shows and movies, but you won't reread a book.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't explain it.
I think it is time commitment, though, because when you talk about a book, generally you're talking at least 4, 5, 6, depending on how big the book is. Many hours, like Dune. That was hours.
Yeah.
Well, and the like, I can put a movie or a show on and then do something else and not feel like but like if I'm gonna read, I want to be reading something that's new to me. I don't want to spend time reading something I already read. But
well, and that's so interesting because not every book will I reread, but I'm likely to reread some, but I will not rewatch TV shows.
Really?
Yes. Because for me, I'm experiencing it for the first time, whereas if I'm rereading a book, I'm rereading something that was special to me.
Yeah.
So there's very few shows I'll rewatch.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I don't think anyone's silly for rereading if you want to do that. I'm just saying for me, there's too much other stuff. Life is finite. There's too much other stuff out there, you know?
Yeah. No, it's just an interesting difference of how people kind of look at rereading in that way. Do you consider listening to audiobooks reading?
No.
Oh, why?
Because it's listening.
Oh,
that's obvious.
It's like splitting hairs, really. But I understand what you're saying. You're not reading with your eyeballs. You're listening.
It's not reading.
It's
like what's the difference between like listening to this podcast and listening to an audiobook? Or, you know, like you're still just listening to someone say words.
Right. You're experiencing a book in a different way. My argument would be that if somebody asked you about the book, they would be able to tell you. I would be able to tell you everything about the book as if I read it. So it's not reading.
But it's as if you read it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not reading.
Yeah. I don't have any it's a great way to absorb books, but I wouldn't, like if someone were to say like, oh, did you read Moby Dick? I would say no, but I listened to it. And I probably wouldn't say I read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're being more particular.
I probably.
Yeah. That's fine. That is absolutely okay. We embrace all kinds of readers and opinions here.
No, we don't. Get out.
Okay. I have a couple of really quick, just rapid fire questions that you can answer. Do you prefer fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Do you like to read hardback versus paperback?
Paperback to read, hardback to have.
Okay. Do you like to buy books or borrow?
Buy.
Bookmarks or dog ears?
Bookmarks, obviously.
Do you finish books or do you DNF?
I do not finish. If it's bad, I'm not going to waste time.
You are definitely my child.
Yeah. It's all about efficiency.
Okay, so our final question for you is why did you pick Dune for our discussion today?
Why did I pick Dune?
Because you wanted to torture us?
Well, partially, probably, yeah. One, I feel like Dune is way outside of both of your comfort zones.
Yes.
I felt like that would be fun to make you read something you probably wouldn't choose to read unless I made you. And aside from that, I think that Dune is a genre defining book, I think. I think it was written very early on in the science fiction thing. I feel like it defined a lot for science fiction. And I feel like there's a lot that you can talk about with Frank Herbert's writing style or the way he developed characters or what, but
the themes
themes
that he introduces.
Yeah. But whether or not you like his writing, I think that the story and the world that he created will last forever. I think it's a great story, and I think that there's you can find a lot of stuff that people borrowed from Dune all over the place in science fiction. Some very popular science fiction, even though Dune was written in the 50s?
1965. 65,
yeah. So it beat pretty much everything else. And so that's probably probably because, science fiction is probably one of my favorite genres, and Dune is a very important seminal work of science fiction.
It's an OG,
an OG
science fiction book.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I think you said something really interesting, Mark, that this is a book that's very much outside of Mom and I's comfort zone.
More so for you than me.
Sure.
I'm definitely a science fiction reader.
And for all of our griping and complaining about reading this, I do have to give you credit for the fact that you are presenting this book to us to process through in this podcast setting. And I think it's really going to make this episode really dynamic is maybe how I want to say that, because there's a variety of opinions about this book that we can talk about. And
yeah, I thought it would lead to a great discussion. I thought it would make a good, make a good podcast. So why not?
Yeah. So,
and it was fun to watch you squirm a little bit. So,
well, I was about to say, despite of all our complaining, thank you, but maybe I'll just take it back after that.
Sure.
Okay, before we get into the discussion of Dune, I just want to say two things. The first is that we are drinking mojitos that have ice cubes, so you might hear some cube rattling occasionally. And then the second thing is the way that we organize our discussion for these 3 Peas in a Pod episodes for listeners who've never joined us before is we use the call pile rating system. And it was designed by a booktuber whose channel is called Book Roast. And she designed this to be more scientific about rating her books. We're not rating Dune. Well, kind of, we will be at the end, but we're not using call pile to rate.
Right.
We're using the call pile system to organize our thoughts, our talk. And call pile is just an acronym for several different topics that we want to discuss. And those topics are characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue and interest, logic, or we can discuss relationships at that point, and then enjoyment. Then at the end, we'll give an overall rating for the book. And I think sometimes after we discuss a book, for me, the rating goes up. It went up for the Marriage Portrait.
Significantly.
So I think it will go up for this too.
The other thing worth mentioning, 2 things maybe. Dune is so popular right now because of the movies.
Yes. A movie just came out and one is
getting ready to
be
November.
Released. Yeah.
So, as always, if you have seen the movie and are listening to this, be prepared for there to be differences. But then with that being said, if you haven't seen the movie yet and are interested in the book, there are going to be major spoilers in this discussion.
Right. We're going to talk about the entire
So this
book.
is spoiler friendly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Heavy, spoiler
All right.
heavy.
Yes. Well, and
Roger
we're
that.
talking about a classic piece of literature. It's already part of our cultural identity. So it's really hard to spoil a book that's been around that long.
Sure.
Most people have a basic understanding of what's happening in the book.
Maybe depends on who they are.
Right. But we're definitely spoiling the story. Why am I having so much trouble?
Well, we are
spoiling?
drinking mojitos.
Okay. So I'm going to do a synopsis. You guys can jump in and add anything you want to. Dune is a science fiction story. It's an epic science fiction tale. The book was written in 1965, as I mentioned earlier. So it is a classic, and it really is the precursor to most of the prominent science fiction that we're familiar with today. It's written by Frank Herbert, and he wrote the book as 3 separate books within a book. The first book introduces, and I'm going to say this now, we're going to butcher some of the names and the words that are in this book.
Yeah, Frank Herbert basically created a language of terms. Like there's an appendix in the back of the book that defines everything that's not English.
Yes.
But I will say, and I'm going to get into this later on for another topic, it is heavily influenced by Arabic.
Yes.
Oh yeah, which makes a lot of sense. But I don't speak Arabic, so that doesn't help me.
No, but I have a fun story to tell about that.
But
later.
I am like, the main character is Paul Atreides. I say Atreides because I learned German, and that is how you would pronounce this name in German. But Julia, what were you calling him? Atreides. And somebody said Atreides. So
yeah,
whatever. Okay, our main character is Paul.
I think they'll figure it out. It'll sound close
It'll
enough.
be Paul.
Yeah.
In the first book of Dune, we are introduced to the Atreides noble house. They live on Caladan, which is a planet that's lush and green and beautiful, has oceans and
Feels very Earth-like in the descriptions.
Well, it feels like the entire planet is basically just New Zealand. That's what I get from it.
Yes.
Like that, like the entire planet of Caladan is just like one big New Zealand.
Hey,
Yeah.
I like that too.
The Atreides house is a smaller noble house. The head of the house is Duke Leto. He has a partner, a concubine. Her name is Jessica, and he has a son named Paul. And they are happily living on their planet. And all of a sudden, the emperor says he has to move to Arrakis, which is Dune. It's a desert planet. It's very desolate. But it is the only place in this realm, this empire, where you can get something called melange, which is a spice that's kind of like cinnamon, but it has all this special power.
Yeah, it's a drug.
Yeah.
Like it's an intoxicant.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it also does something else. Doesn't it also do like space travel? Like it helps with some of that.
Do you want me to just explain that now?
Sure.
Because there's a
go
little bit
ahead.
of a deeper aspect to it.
Yeah.
So before the events of Dune, there was this event called the Butlerian Jihad. This is one of the things I love about Frank Herbert, is that he created a whole history for the world that he was creating.
Right, but he didn't put it in the story.
No, he didn't. That part's not added. But it's alluded to and explained enough to get the idea. So what the Butlerian Jihad, is it Jihad?
Yes,
Wars?
jihad.
Jihad.
Yeah, jihad.
So what that was computers trying to take over the universe, basically.
Right.
And mankind had to defeat the computers.
Right.
And so the universe of Dune is a universe devoid of computers.
Right. No computers.
Yeah. So there are probably two main outcomes of that. Is one, all of the dukes, the emperors, they all have these things called mentats, which are just people, but they're people trained to be incredibly logical, like good at math,
Human
all this stuff.
computers.
Yeah, they're human
to
computers.
look at issues and be very logical.
Yeah, that's their
Yes.
purpose.
They're also assassins.
They're also very
and
assassins.
they're eunuchs.
Yeah, there's a lot involved in it, you know. But the basic gist of their thing is they're human computers to replace the ones that try to take over the world. The second thing is that for all of their deep space travel, they didn't have any computers to use. So I got to try and explain it without using the second book, because the second book is involved a little bit more. But I can't remember what they're called now. I came unprepared. But the pilots of the spaceships are basically just spice addicts, because one of the properties of spice is it gives you the ability to foresee possible future events.
Yes.
So the pilots of these ships would take a bunch of spice, and then they would be like, "Oh, we got to go this way to avoid this asteroid, do this," and that's one of the reasons why spice is such a major deal, is because all of the intergalactic shipping in this universe relies on these pilots who are all addicted to spice.
And the guild, the Space Guild,
Yeah.
is one of the three main parts of the governing system of this whole
Yeah, you have
empire.
the Space Guild, which are the pilots and the ships.
Yes.
You have the houses, which would be like the Harkonnens, which we'll get to later, the Atreides. And then you have the Emperor
the
himself.
Padishah Emperor.
Yeah, the Padishah.
It's like a tripod
Yeah.
situation. And the Space Guild pretty much holds everybody hostage as far as being able to travel anywhere in this. I keep saying realm, this empire.
Yeah, this universe. Yeah. No one has their own spaceships. They can't just go do whatever they want to. They're all reliant on the guild to take them places. Yeah.
Okay, so that's great background. We have this House Atreides, and the Emperor has commanded pretty much that they move to Dune, and Duke Leto is responsible for overseeing the planet, basically, and making sure that this harvesting of the spice, the melange, happens the way it should. I did not understand like the whole motivation for that. This was the part that I struggled with the most, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay, I shouldn't even have said that, but I'm just saying that I struggled
Yeah.
with this. And the whole first book is the family moving to Dune and trying to get a foothold into what's going on. Along with that, there is a plot
Heavy political stuff.
by another house.
Well,
House Harkonnen.
Yeah, which we should mention are the current governors of Arrakis. They've been there for generations,
And they've been kicked out.
Yeah, they ruled Iraq. Which the other thing is with the spice trade, the whatever house was the government of Arrakis was the richest house because they made so much money from spice.
Right. So they've been pushed out. Duke Leto and his family come in, but the emperor who placed him there works alongside Baron Harkonnen, to assassinate him.
Behind closed doors.
Right. It's all very secret.
Very layered. Too.
Right. So that's the first book. Then the second book is after this whole plot has taken place. The Duke is killed, but Paul and his mother
Escape.
Or they're helped. They're actually helped by the person who was supposed to betray them.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, so
They're
book
alive.
There's two. This is what I was saying. There's so much in this. I'm trying to.
So I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. And we can get into it in depth when we do our different areas or categories. So the book 2 is the Freemen, who are the native people of Arrakis, take Paul and his mother Jessica in and show them how to live on this planet and survive.
Now, if I may interject here.
Yes.
One thing that you forgot to mention was the whole Bene Gesserit thing. So in this universe, there's this secretive, I don't want to say cult, but it's almost a cult. It's like a school of mysticism.
Specifically for women.
For women called the Bene Gesserit, which is basically they're like witches, kind of.
But they're called sisters.
They're perceived as witches.
They are.
But they're called sisters.
Yes.
So basically it's young. I'm going to try and think of how to describe it. It's a secret society with the purpose of genetic engineering.
Right.
Like they're genetically engineering people because they want to produce this. They want to produce a male called the Kwisatz Haderach, which is like the Messiah.
Yes.
But it's a school for young girls, and they teach them certain ways of doing things. They grow up to be concubines. They're concubines of the houses.
Or wives
if they marry them. Yeah. But they place them specifically to genetically produce what they think they want to have.
Superior human beings.
Yeah. So they train these girls in the voice, which is a commanding power they have over people. They say things and can make people do things that seem unnatural. Kind of think of like the Force of Star Wars.
Yeah.
This is one of the things we were talking about, how like things were stolen from Dune. This is like one of the big things. But so anyway, the Bene Gesserit had gone around to a lot of these planets, and they had like placed safeguards, as they called it, where they would go to planets, to the people that lived on these planets, and they would like interject this religious thing that this Messiah would come. And they did that so that if a Bene Gesserit got stuck there, they could just pretend to be a Messiah, and then they'd be fine.
They'd be taken care of.
So this had happened on Arrakis. So when Jessica and Paul are stuck out in the desert, and they both have this power of the voice because Jessica taught it to Paul.
Yes, because she wanted him to be the Kwisatz Haderach.
She thought he would be. And we'll get there. But so they run into the Fremen in the desert, and then all the Fremen are like, they might be the Messiah. That's that was like their thoughts. So that was kind of why the Fremen took them in.
Right. And the whole second book is Paul proving that he is who they think he is.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing to note, that when they get taken in, they change his name so that, one, nobody can claim, oh, Paul and Jessica are here. But then secondly, there is prophecy that the Messiah will be called Muad'Dib. And
the mouse.
The mouse. And that is the name that Paul picks for himself, on top of the Freeman name that he assumes as well.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Paul wants revenge for his father's death, and he wants to reclaim the planet. So not only are the Fremen teaching him how to survive, he's showing them how to fight to win, and they're planning like a revenge jihad, really, against the rest of not all the noble houses, but against the emperor and
and the Harkonnens. At this time, it was, what was his name?
Rabin.
Yeah, Rabin. That's right. The whatever, like nephew of Baron Harkonnen, who we'll talk about later.
Yes.
But
and then the third book is basically the war. Basically
building up to it.
With a couple other little details.
There's other stuff going on.
And Paul's fully assuming his role.
His messianic role. So basically it's broken down to, they leave their home planet, go to Arrakis. There's a big fight. The Duke is killed. Jessica and Paul are thrown in the desert. They find salvation with the Fremen. They teach the Fremen stuff, and then they retake the planet, and a bunch of other stuff happens.
Yeah. So that's basically
Spark notes.
it.
We're
Yeah.
done. Goodbye.
So now what we're going to do, since we have that overview, we're going to dive in first to characters. So I think the first character we should talk about is Paul, because he is, I feel like the story kind of revolves
centered around him.
He's the whole deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Paul is 15 when the book starts.
Yep.
He's probably 17 or 18.
Yeah,
And
that's
18.
one thing with Frank Herbert's writing is the passage of time is a little difficult to
It's
follow.
weird.
You just kind of have to make inferences based off of some details
Right.
that pop up.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's about 15 when it starts, and then 17 or
Okay.
18.
So what do you think about Paul?
I have
Anything you wanna
thoughts.
add?
Anybody? Do you want to
Go
start,
ahead.
Mark?
Yeah, you can start. You can start, and then I'll go.
I had a difficult time deciding if I liked Paul or not.
Well, but I feel like that's the point. Sorry, I don't mean to
Right.
jump in, but
No,
yeah, go ahead.
But,
Go
but
ahead.
it's helpful. I struggled with trying to figure out if he was being overly dramatic with his understanding of the Bene Gesserit teachings that Jessica gave him, or if he truly was this person that was prophet. Please help me.
The prophet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That word doesn't
Or
want to
the
come out of my
Messiah.
mouth. Yes. And so I went back and forth. There is a scene in this book shortly after the Duke is killed where Paul experiences spice for the first time. And it's also while he's trying to figure out why he's having a difficult time grieving. So you see this passage unfolding where he is seeing the future and he's computing really fast and right. I did not like him at that point because I didn't know what was going on, and he was almost feeling, I felt like that led into a character arc of arrogance, and I struggled with that a little bit.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
I actually really disliked him at that point in the book.
Well, yeah.
I hated how he treated his mother. I just, part of me just thought he's being a ridiculous teenager
Yeah.
who has a very bloated image of himself.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I got over that. I felt like he did a lot of growing up, but there was a point in the book where I did not like him
Yeah.
at all. I did not
Do you
like
have
him.
anything else to add?
No,
He
I think that was the
also-
main point of like I just was annoyed with him half the
He
time.
also started out as this very observant, kind of naive,
Yeah.
protected person.
Yeah.
And his father died, and he just, I don't know, I felt like he turned into a completely different person. Not that people don't do that when they feel like they've lost someone they loved and they've been wronged, but it was abrupt. Like
It just happened.
it was a whiplash kind of
And
thing.
if you watch the movie, it's the same thing. That's just how it occurs in the story, I suppose. But yeah, Paul's complicated because he starts off as like a kid, you know. He does all of his fighting stuff. He has the voice, like he's a well-trained kid, but he's still like very naive. And then they get to Dune. The Duke is killed. All this stuff happens. Him and Jessica escape in a ornithopter. Ornithopter,
Yeah.
that's what they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically just like a helicopter with beating
bird.
wings. Yeah.
a bird helicopter.
It's in that part when they're in the ornithopter where not ornithopter, but yeah, where they where Paul kind of he undergoes this transformation, and that's when he has with spice he has the power of presence or prescience, whatever they call it. So
Prescience.
prescience, yeah. So he can like see glimpses into the future a bit, and one of the things that is complicated with Paul is the fact that you want to cheer him on as this champion because the Harkonnens are just these ugly,
Vile.
nasty people, yeah. And you just want him to go and kill them all and retake the planet. And everyone's like, oh, happy, yeah. But Paul is also struggling with this idea that the Fremen will view him as a messiah and they will undergo a galactic jihad in the name of Muad'Dib. And that's his whole deal. Is so it like through the middle part of the book, he's like, how do I go about regaining this planet, righting the wrong that has been done, but not causing a galactic jihad? And that's kind of what I think makes Paul complicated is because it's difficult to view any I don't even know how to describe it, because how many other books do you read where there's like a messianic figure that's not a religious book?
few.
It's tricky. It's like it's weird.
He even from the beginning, Frank Herbert foreshadows this big, I forget what he calls it, this terrible, what does he call it? There's this terrible thing that he is drawn to and that he is going to be responsible for. I can't remember the phraseology. It's the terrible purpose. Purpose.
Yeah, the jihad.
And but he doesn't know that's what it is.
Yeah.
He can't in the beginning even visualize it or say what it is. And it's only the spice that helps him see.
It opens it up.
Yeah.
And what even makes him the Messiah figure is because before he took the spice, he already had the Bene Gesserit training and the Mentat training. So he had two forms of ways of looking at things that most other people don't have. And then he took the spice, which impacts everybody with that little bit of prescience and being able to see the future, because it even says that the Fremen had that. They even had that a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point too, that when Paul is out with his father and meeting the Freeman for the first time, and he's making observations, some of the prominent Freemen people are like, wow, he is demonstrating things that were prophesied. So he's already kind of set up to fill this role from the Freeman perspective.
Yeah. Plus, I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, as I meant, like the whole Kwisatz Haderach idea, is so if you read like the afterword, Frank Herbert wrote a lot of stuff that goes with Dune that's not mentioned in Dune.
Right.
That, like, if you read it afterwards, some stuff makes a lot more sense. So the Bene Gesserit plan with their whole genetic engineering is they wanted Jessica to bear a daughter.
Yes.
With Duke Leto, and that daughter was going to marry a Harkonnen, Freud Ratha or Ratha, who you meet later on.
Fayed,
or Fayed, I can't remember any of these. Like, if I'm reading it, it makes it, but I can't. Right. Yeah, I'm not going to remember any of them. But
the names.
Yeah, that daughter was going to marry him, and then they were going to bear a son, and they were like, "This is going to be the Kwisatz Haderach. This is going to be our Messiah."
Right.
And Jessica is like, I'm just going to do it now.
I'm doing my own thing.
Yeah, so she had a son with the Duke, thinking that he would be the Kwisatz Haderach. And the very first scene in the book is on Kaladin.
Yes.
What's the other?
The Reverend Mother.
Yeah, the Reverend Mother. Yeah, I should know that. Jeez. The Reverend Mother is like the head mistress of the Bene Gesserit. She kind of runs it.
Yeah, the supreme reverend.
Yeah.
She's the truth sayer for the emperor.
Yes.
Yeah. So she's very powerful.
Yeah. So she comes and she gives Paul this test with the Gom Jabbar, which is this poison needle. He puts his hand in a box that causes excruciating pain. But if he flinches or if he moves or acknowledges the pain, she'll stab him or he'll prick himself with the needle and die. And Paul passes the test very well. And Jessica, in the talking with the Reverend Mother, is like, do you think that he might be? And she was like, no idea, but you messed up. Because the Bene Gesserit were very angry with Jessica for doing this.
Yeah.
But so I think that foreshadows almost the end of the book right in the beginning.
Right, yeah.
I feel like it's supposed to be easy to pick up on. But yeah, so yeah, Paul wrestles with this whole messianic thing. Is it like he's destined to be the Kwisatz Haderach from the beginning? You know, and then he goes through all of his trials to get there.
Well, let's just talk about Jessica a little bit, since she plays a huge role in the book from the beginning. She is a Bene Gesserit. She does not know her parentage. She has no idea who her mother was.
But we do later.
She does not know right away.
Well, she finds out too. I think she finds out as well when
she finds
do.
out from Paul.
Yeah, because he sees it, doesn't he?
He sees one part of it. I don't think he sees all of it.
So this is interesting to me because I see this play out in other big science fiction after this. It ends up that the Bene Gesserit have done their little genetic manipulations, and they take one of the sisters of the sect. I keep thinking sect.
That's fine. That's a good term.
And they pair her with Baron Harkonnen's father, right? No, with him.
Yeah.
With him. And Jessica is the result.
Yeah.
So she is actually the daughter of Baron Harkonnen, who is the
The big bad
big
guy.
enemy
Yeah,
of
the big bad
gross
guy.
the
ball of
Atreides
slime.
family, and here she is. So Paul, the reason that Paul is so mad at her, and it's not
In
her
the
fault,
second
Yeah,
book.
exactly.
Yeah.
is that he has Harkonnen blood and
Yes.
Yeah.
didn't know it.
Yeah.
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 She's not married to the Duke.
Mm-mm.
This is the one thing about the Duke that made me angry. He never married her because he always wanted to keep the door open to the possibility of marrying somebody to make better connections.
Yeah. Marrying up.
Yes,
Yeah.
marrying up, exactly. But he loved Jessica. He just never took her as his wife, and that made me mad.
Yeah.
But it does come out later on that he wish he had.
Yes.
Well, yeah,
But you
because
can wish a lot of
he's
things.
obviously dying.
Yeah.
Well, right, but it wasn't for lack of love on his part.
Oh
It
no,
was-
that
he was
wasn't the thing
thinking
at all.
political,
Yeah, it was purely
right? Yeah.
political, which is an
Exactly, yeah.
entire theme in the whole book.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
every
the whole
capital
thing.
P. Yeah.
even Paul.
Yeah.
So she has a ton of power, more power, I think, than a lot of people give her credit for.
Yeah.
And she, even though on the outside is very calm, she hides her emotions for the most part. She feels things deeply, and she is almost like I don't want to say the power behind Paul, but you can definitely see her moving to push him
Yeah.
along a certain
Yeah,
path.
exactly. And she wields the voice very powerfully in the
Yes.
book. That's like her thing.
Yeah,
She-
Yes.
people are afraid of her.
yeah.
Yes.
She
Yeah.
bends people to her will.
Yeah.
Well, and they call it the weirding way. And
Yeah,
that's how
yeah.
they were able to get safety with the Freemen, because they were like, teach us your way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I struggled with Jessica a little less than Paul, but I kind of got the vibe from her that she questioned and or regretted a lot of her decisions throughout the entire book. It just, in my reading, my perspective of her, felt that she made the decisions that she did and then was unsure of them later on. Because even when she took on the role of the Reverend Mother in the Freeman culture, it even came across that she was even unsure of that decision. Now, there were other consequences that came from that, but I never got the feeling that she was confident with where her life was headed. If that makes sense,
It
the way that I'm
does.
saying it.
Yeah, I think she
Now,
didn't
there's-
know what the outcome would be.
Yeah, there's a couple other wrinkles that are added into that whole scenario, in being in that she was pregnant at the time, and
Yeah.
becoming the Reverend Mother involves taking a very large dose of a very potent version of
Yes.
spice,
Yes.
which has ramifications later on.
Yeah, it
Pretty
does.
big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about Duke Leto? He doesn't play a
He's
huge
minor.
role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
he's not in the book for very long, and he always felt like a shadow character to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what I will say is I very much appreciated how there was an emphasis on his leadership being people focused, and how towards the end of the book, when Paul is leading this jihad, I forget who it was, Gurney or somebody, tells Paul, your father would have cared more about the people who perished than what the consequence
outcome
was.
would be.
Right.
Yeah,
And I think that that's really integral to Paul's development into this Messiah character, learning, how to balance the influence that his dad had on him in leadership, but also what's demanded of him in the current position as well.
Yeah. I feel like Duke Leto is kind of he's an important character to the development of the story. I like him as a character because I feel like Frank Herbert tries to portray him as like the perfect leader.
a good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think
good-
he's
yeah.
trying to contrast him against
Yeah.
the Harkonnens that are currently there,
Yeah.
who are pretty brutal, with the whole idea that he's going to go there and he's going to build great relationships with the Fremen, and he's like they're going to fix everything up. And yeah, I liked him as a character. I definitely I didn't want him to die, because I almost feel like you could just write a book with Duke Leto, like you could
Right.
just make him a character and
Right.
but
Like
Yeah.
his story could be.
Yeah,
his
exactly.
story.
Well, and that's the other thing too. Very early on in the book that a plot is coming in which he's going to die.
well, and the thing is, the Atreides are aware of it.
yes.
Like before they go, they know. They know.
what kind of mess they're stepping into.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's also revealed how layered the plot is going to be, the plot to kill
Yeah.
Duke Leto. So you know very early on who the traitor is going to be, but you also know who the red herring is going to be as well. So you get to see how it splinters within everybody too.
Let's move away from the Atreides family and talk about the big bad wolf, who would be Baron Harkonnen or Harkonnen again.
Yeah, however you want to say, it's up to you.
He is presented as this grossly obese, extremely gross, cruel, uncaring. There's another word I want.
But very smart.
I don't know if he's portrayed as smart.
Smart. I don't mean smart as in like, I mean more smart in being
Devious.
able to move pieces around to get where he wants to
I
be.
don't think he's portrayed. I think he's portrayed as just kind of like just a dumb brute,
a depraved, ruthless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like that he's devious.
Yeah.
Sure.
He's devious.
But I mean, he's just humongous. He has to have suspensors to hold up his
parts.
Yeah.
But this
He's
is why I
bald.
asked you the other day, is he supposed to be humorous? Because as you think about this mass of a human walking around with suspensors, like I just wanted to laugh.
When I read it, when I read the book, I thought it was humorous.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like suspense, like he's just got things under his rolls. Yeah,
And
holding him up.
who did you say he reminded you?
Jabba the Hutt.
Pizza the gut.
Yeah, Pizza the Gut.
Spaceballs.
Yeah,
I said, "Oh yeah, Jabba the Hutt." That's the first thing I thought of was this humanoid
exactly.
Jabba the Hutt.
But if you watch the movie, the way they portray him in the movie is terrifying.
Is it?
Yeah, it's awfully scary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which,
I'll have to.
I mean,
take
it's
a
certain.
look.
There are certain parts where he's like,
Yeah.
I don't like pathetic almost, but yeah, but a lot of his portrayals are pretty scary.
Well, and there are some very definitive violent scenes that he's kind of leading.
Yeah, well, yeah, no
He's
doubt.
very violent. But he also says that if you get called in front of the emperor, your hands have to be clean. So he's hardly ever doing any of the violence himself.
Yeah, he's letting everyone
Which
else.
is why I said he's smart, because he knows how to put those things together so that it never comes back to him.
Yeah.
Very manipulative.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that he was able to get a traitor within the Atreides household is because he took that person's wife and held her hostage and then killed her anyway.
Yeah, so I think we could just talk about that for a second. So we talked about Harkonnen, just to lay out the groundwork for
Right,
Harkonnen.
for who he is.
So a member of the Atreides house is Dr. Yu, who is their resident physician, basically. And he has a wife that was kidnapped by the Harkonnens. And
She was also a Bene Gesserit.
Yes.
yeah, she was also a Bene Gesserit. And the Baron used this wife to get the doctor to commit to this plot, where the doctor gives the Harkonnens access to the place where they're staying on Arrakis, and then they go in and kill everybody they think. So that's a good way to yeah.
But Dr. Yu, I was saying Yue, whatever, also gives everybody an out. So he gives a way for the Duke Leto to supposedly kill the Baron.
Yes.
But then also takes care of Paul and Jessica as
Exactly.
well in the
Yeah. So
process.
he gets Paul and Jessica to leave, and then he gives the Duke a cyanide tooth or a gas tooth, something like that. That he's like, when he leans in real close to your face, just bite the tooth and blow it. Because I feel like one of the things with Dr. Yu is I feel like the whole time he just knows like his wife's dead.
Yeah,
he
He
knows
knows,
it.
but he's like, if there's any glimmer of hope, I have to do anything I
Right.
can. So that's why he agrees to this plot. But then he's like, I'll agree to this plot, but not for the success of the Harkonnen. So he tries to make it work. But yeah, that's a little later on thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the Harkonnens.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say. He's set up as the bad guy.
Yeah, but there's
and he's the driving force for killing the Duke, and then he's also the driving force for Paul
yeah.
to take revenge.
Now we should also, I think, talk about his ruling methods of Arrakis, because that's another key thing.
Yeah.
So as the governor of Arrakis, he's kind of in charge of the exportation of spice, which hadn't been going super well because it's difficult to do. So for a little more background, the way that they mined spice is they had these big, giant ornithopter things with these big crawler miners. So spice is just in the sand. So these crawlers would just go over the sand, filter it, and collect the spice, and then that would be it. But you had to go way out in the desert to do it. And in the desert, there are these ginormous sandworms. Like, I don't know how you describe their size.
The worms from Beetlejuice, but crazier and larger.
Yeah, they're just huge. They have teeth.
400 meters.
Yeah, they're just giant.
Yeah,
and
huge.
They're attracted to thumping. So you can't. That's another thing with the desert. You can't you have to do the Fremen walk.
Yeah.
You can't just run across the desert or you'll attract a sandworm. So these mining things are obviously thumping. So they have a certain amount of time that they can be out there doing this before a sandworm just appears. And so the idea is that you set it down, it mines for a little bit, and there are these other ornithopters around that watch for the bulge of a sandworm. And when one shows up, they clear it out. Yeah. In one of the scenes when the Atreides first get there, Paul and the Duke go up in an ornithopter to watch a mining operation. And in this mining operation, the carrier thopter, the one that's supposed to pick the mining caddy up, doesn't show up when a worm does, so they get to watch a worm, almost like if you watch the second Pirates of the Caribbean and the Kraken just comes up and like swallows whole ships.
Yeah, exactly.
The worm just comes up and makes a big hole and the whole thing goes in it.
Yeah.
And that's it. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but it's important. It's groundwork.
It is.
So the Harkonnens hated the Fremen, and they were very harsh on the people of Arrakis. They were all like, mine the spice, like very hard iron fist. Yeah. It was like a slave operation, essentially. Yeah. So that's...
And Duke Leto he wanted actually to make the Fremen part of his army almost. Like he wanted to build them up and then let them be power behind him.
Well, I saw part of it as in when they were going to Arrakis, the Duke knew the Harkonnens were going to try, like he knew that there was going to be some manner of conflict. He just didn't know when. And part of his plan, because he had meetings with, he met with some other characters that we'll talk about, but he wanted to be on the good side of the Fremen because he wanted to enlist their help and have them as an army. Because he was like, these people live in the desert in the harshest place. Who better to field an army than these people? Yeah. So he wanted to make the Fremen an army, and he wanted to use them in mining. And the Harkonnens did not. They were just trying to kill them all.
Right. Let's talk about the Fremen. We're not going to do individuals for the most part, but I think we should talk about who they were and who they kind of represent in our real world. Anybody want to?
Well, I can start. For me, I enjoyed the passages with the Fremen, much like I enjoyed the passages with the Mentats or the Mentans.
The Mentats, yeah.
And then the Bene Gesserits, because I enjoyed that use of the logic and the artistic speech that they had. I found that to be very enjoyable to read and a very unique way of looking at this rough world that they were in. I really enjoyed the passages when we saw kind of behind the curtain, so to speak, of how they lived in these caves, in this highly developed culture, and their very creative ways of preserving water and thinking about water. It is not anything that I think I would have thought of before, of all of the ways in which you would need to preserve water. The still suits in which your nose plug into your body.
Yeah. Where you gather your sweat.
Right? That you don't cry if you're crying for somebody who passed. That's a pretty significant deal.
A waste of water.
Yeah. Or the gallons, the absolute liters of water that they had, and how it was such an important deal that if you gave somebody your liter coins, that it meant that you were developing a relationship with them because it was such a significant part to trust somebody else with.
And it meant wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was,
significant wealth.
The other thing I think is important is when a Fremen died, they would take their body and squeeze every last drop out of it.
It's almost like they desiccated it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was fascinating. They're a tribal people for sure, very superstitious, very religious, but not just that. They are they outwitted the emperor's army.
Mhm.
They were very brave. They fought well, and they were very intelligent.
Mhm.
So it was an interesting combination of superstition and wiliness, I think is the
Mhm.
word I want.
Mhm.
I just
Yeah.
found them fascinating. I know they're compared to like the Muslim tribal people in the Middle East. But as I was reading, I thought you could also say you could compare them to the Hebrews in the Old Testament. I got that impression too.
And then there was also a passage in the book too about the pillar of cloud and the pillar of
Yes,
smoke.
there were a lot
as
of
well.
biblical references.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember what that was in reference to this pillar, but that did come up at one point.
Yeah. But definitely using the term jihad would make you think Muslim.
Yeah.
And there was one episode in the book where there was not a suicide bomber, but somebody who was willing to give up their life to take out part of the enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is also definitely like an extremist Muslim concept.
Jihad, yeah.
So it was just very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very strong sense of honor.
Mm-hmm.
So they had something called Canley, which is how you fought for honor, or how you showed how you took revenge. Not revenge, that's not the word I want, but
How you defended your
yourself.
honor.
Yeah, defended your
Yeah.
honor.
Yeah. Well, and that was so interesting too, that when Paul bested one of the warriors, he then assumed that warrior's wife and children as
Yes.
his own. He could choose to have them as family or as slaves for 1 year. So that was a really interesting element as well.
Well, and they also did that to decide who was going to be the boss
Yeah.
of the tribe.
Yeah.
And that is one way that Paul was kind of working to bend the culture of the freemen so that didn't happen. Freeman.
Yeah, because it was Stilgar was the leader, and Paul wanted to be the leader, but he
Or
didn't
He felt like the people were
want to push
him.
it, but he didn't want to
Right.
kill Stilgar because
Yeah.
he wanted him around.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So he found a way to work around that and
Yeah.
make it okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else you want to talk about?
Well,
Chani.
I was going to say I think we should touch on a few
Okay.
Fremen characters. So we could start with Stilgar. There are these I can't remember what they called them, but there were like individual tribes of Fremen.
Oh, Sietch.
Sietch, which is like the caves. There were
Yeah.
like different tribes lived in these different cave systems. And Stilgar was the leader of the one tribe that had come upon Jessica and Paul in the desert. He's difficult to describe as a character. He's very loyal, and he follows Paul very closely. I don't know that he necessarily plays a huge role, really, except for in the end where Paul's trying to assume the leadership of the tribe. But
Yeah.
there's Chani,
Yes.
who is becomes Paul's
Concubine.
concubine, I guess is
know
what you
else
could say.
you- Partner.
Yeah.
Yes, because at the end when so Paul and Chani have a child together.
Yeah.
Well, they have twins, right?
No, not
They
the.
have a son
They have
that
a
they
son.
name Leto.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm getting confused. Yeah, they have a son. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Disregard me.
So after the child dies because of this jihad, in order to make not peace with the emperor, but maybe that's essentially what it is, Paul says that he will marry the princess of Rulin.
Who is the emperor's daughter?
Yes.
Yeah,
and
now-
takes Chani as his
Concubine.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the emperor didn't want that
No.
at the end. Very much so didn't want that.
Yeah.
But
No,
Yes.
because he realized that it would ultimately mean that Paul
yeah.
would have power.
Direct
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here
Yeah.
a little bit. So Chani she's a fierce warrior,
Yes.
takes to Paul immediately.
Yes.
They end up having a child together.
Yeah.
And there's another very important one, Dr. Kynes,
I was
Yes.
going to say.
who is the planetary ecologist from the Empire.
He's also a Freeman, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be overseeing the Atreides, thing, but he doesn't really care because he just cares about the Fremen.
Right.
And he's orchestrating he wants to terraform the planet, and he wants it to be lush with water. He wants the Fremen to be able to live in a planet with, all that kind of stuff. So he has this whole vast terraforming plan. And it turns out that they've been terraforming small patches. Like they would be in the desert and they would just find small patches of trees or bushes and stuff like that. And that's why they're saving all their water. Like they have a big cache of water that they're going to use to terraform the planet. Yeah, so that's Dr. Kynes is pretty important. He plays an important role later on. He helps Jessica and Paul escape.
He does.
Yeah.
The tribe that finds them, they go to one of the Sietches, the caves, and the Sardaukar,
yeah,
sauerkraut,
the royal, the Imperial Guard.
yeah, the Imperial Guard. They're like the fierce warriors that everyone's terrified of.
Yeah.
It turns out at the end that the Fremen pretty much dismantle them, but
it's
Totally
like 1
wipe
to
them
10.
out.
Yeah.
But
at the time, the Sardaukar found where they were in this siege, and they closed in on them, and were going to try and kill Jessica and Paul. And Dr. Kynes dies in that interaction, but he dies getting Paul and Jessica out of the cave.
Yeah.
Well, and we should mention, too, that Chani is Dr. Kynes' daughter.
Yes.
That's an important thing as well.
Yes, that's exactly
that's
right.
an important thing.
And the other thing about Chani is she has some of the gifts of the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
She's untrained, but she does have some of the skills.
Yeah.
So that's another part of her character that you get to see.
Yep.
Well, in discussing characters, we've actually discussed a lot of the story.
We have.
Our second category that we want to talk about is atmosphere. So this would be, you could talk about setting, you could talk about the feel of the book, whatever we want to do here. I mean, the setting is basically a desert planet.
Yeah.
The Fremen, they operate and work at night and they sleep during the day. So when I was reading this, in my mind, this was a dark book. When I was picturing the world, I always pictured a desert scene with a dark sky. We do spend some time on, is it Getty's Prime?
Getty Prime.
Getty,
With
the prison
Baron.
planet. Yeah.
But I had no picture of that because Frank Herbert does not describe.
He
There's
describes
not a
some
whole lot of
things.
description.
He describes some things very thoroughly, and then other things he just totally blows over.
Yeah.
I just kind of pictured Gaiety Prime or whatever as just like a planetary personification of the Baron, just dark and like I don't know.
Nasty, dark, and lots of suffering.
Yeah.
I did not have a whole lot of feeling for atmosphere in this.
I didn't either.
Like I said, I had a good sense of Dune.
Yeah.
But nothing else.
Yeah.
No, I think my atmosphere was political atmosphere. Okay. So I felt that a lot heavier. I mean, yes, I was aware of the desert. I knew what it looked like when the worms came through, and all of that, the caves of the Freemen with the rugs and the lamps and all of that.
Yes, I could picture that too.
Yes, but for me, the atmosphere was a lot more political, a lot more. I felt the non-tangible, the tension, the strife, the conflict of the messianic themes. I felt all of that a lot more than the actual physical atmosphere.
The political intrigue and the religious seal, I think.
Yeah, I felt a little bit of foreboding because like in the beginning of the book, you know something big is going to happen, but you just don't exactly know when it is, and then all of a sudden it happens, and then in the middle of the book you know that something else very big is going to happen. It's almost like almost like imminent destruction in a way.
I agree. Foreboding is definitely there and felt.
Yeah, I would say tension is a great way to describe the atmosphere.
I agree.
What about the writing? What do you think about Frank Herbert's writing?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
I did not love his writing. Now, that might come as a surprise because I love the book. I just think the story is so good, and I like the fact that it's so complicated. But there are some things. I mean, I didn't hate his writing, but it's not my favorite to read. Some things I felt like needed to be described a little bit more to get a good picture, and I felt like some things were incredibly abrupt. Like, which I don't really have a problem with, but like something major would happen and then it would just be like, that was it. And then it's just like on to the next thing. And that, you know, it didn't really seem like there was much of like a leading into much.
What do you think, Julia?
There's a couple of things that I want to say. The first thing, and this might just have been when I was trying to read this book, but I had a night a couple of nights ago where I was trying to read it. And for a half an hour, I realized I was reading 5 words and then I was picking my nails, 5 more words and I was itching my scalp, 5 more words and I was fixing the blankets. And I realized that was a major sign that I was bored. Granted, I had a lot of stuff going on at work that day that I probably just couldn't shut my mind off to read. But I did find that I was having there were several times where I was reading a passage and totally zoning out and would have to go back and read it like 5 or 6 times. That being said, I had a really interesting personal experience with this story. I purposely, maybe that's not how I want to say that. I wasn't incredibly aware of the Islamic or Arabic influence up until about 3/4 of the way through the book. There was a passage in the book where they were talking about somebody going on a picnic and having things with them and whatever. And the phrase mishmish was used. I support somebody at work who is from Iran, and he loves mishmish, peaches. So at work, when he wants a snack, he asks for mishmish. So it was that phrase that I knew instantly how much influence from that was in the book.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting for me. I was also really intrigued about the focus on the voice, capital V voice, but then also on how Frank Herbert talked about people using their voice, in how it was pitched up and pitched down, how people were, the way that they spoke to each other through their voice was really interesting. And so, yeah, it was a really curious thing for me. And then I feel like I'm definitely rambling at this point. However, the final thing I'll say is I struggled with the writing, but there were some descriptive things that I really liked. So, for example, how he talked about the worms coming through the sand, that he would just pull words together in a phrase of like the round sand mound moved through right? How he threw things together, I thought was really interesting. But then how he talked about the nature writing too was really cool, because there was a sentence where he said, as the sun dipped, was moving into evening, it dipped a toe across the dunes. And so it was just a really interesting use of language to talk about this world as well.
I agree. I felt like there were moments of real poetic writing, but I think they stood out to me because
there was
they were
not
few and
many
far
of them.
between.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that Frank Herbert is a bad writer.
No.
I think he has writing skill. He just is not my type of writer.
No, I agree.
I love much more description. I struggled with a lot of things with his writing. I absolutely hated. He had this thing where there would be dialogue going on, and then you would get these italicized individual thoughts of the characters. And so they would be saying one thing, and then you'd get this thought that went in their head that was oftentimes exactly the opposite of what they were saying. And it just, it drove me nuts. It was a technique that he used repeatedly that I hated. And I'm like you, Mark. I felt like we would be in a scene, and then abruptly we would be in a different scene, and then abruptly move to another scene. I almost felt like I was sitting behind a camera, and Frank Herbert was just switching me back and forth, and that annoyed me. I honestly, when I was thinking about this, when I was getting ready for this today, I thought he could have taken the 3 books and made them individual books. And that probably would have made me happy, because he could have expounded on everything that I would have liked. Then he did a lot of explanation and exposition in the appendices in the back of the book. And I felt like that should have been
at the
part of the story.
I couldn't agree more.
Part of the story.
Yeah.
Because he starts Dune, the first book of Dune, and you are dropped right in the
Smack.
middle with no help. Like it's almost like you are left to fend for yourself to figure out what in the world is going on here.
Yeah.
It felt very Star Wars-y in that, because the first of the three good ones.
Let's say that Star Wars feels very Doonesy.
Okay, but do you know the point that I'm making?
I know
that
what you're saying.
You
Yeah, I
start
know
the
what you're saying.
first of the original movies just thrown smack in
Yeah.
to the situation, and so I definitely agree. It takes you a good long while to settle into what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I struggled a lot with the writing. It definitely is not the type of writing I like. I like much more description. He does a lot of telling. Like he tells you things, but he doesn't show you. And I would much rather he wrote in a way that he's showing you how people feel, or he's showing relationships develop, and he doesn't do that. You're just supposed to take it at face value that he and Chani have this connection that he is willing to carry with him when he goes and marries the princess. There's nothing in the story that would make me think that they have that deep of a relationship. I mean, we're told they have a child, but
Yeah.
Well, Paul's
So what?
18
Well,
when they have this
right,
child.
yeah.
Yeah. Plus, the other thing that you can talk about is the random passage of time. Like
Yes.
it seems, you know, where you'll end at one spot and pick up at the other, and then it'll just be
2
like,
years.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
2
like,
years
oh,
later.
she's pregnant. They
Yeah.
actually really like each other. It's
Yes.
just like it just seems.
Jessica had a daughter and she's
Yeah.
now 3 years old.
Yeah.
It was Supreme Reverend Mother.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I struggle
No.
a lot with that.
It actually didn't bother me that much. I mean, obviously, because I really liked the book, but I kind of liked how you would get to parts, like you would get to occurrences faster because there wasn't wasted time, but then all the time was wasted in describing everyone's thoughts nonstop about everything. So, you know,
I just want to say one thing about the Arabic and how that surprised me. You mentioned, Julia, too, about the use of Arabic, like mishmash. I looked into the term muad'dib or dib, and that is actually an Arabic term. It's written a little bit differently. The emphasis is different, but it means teacher.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought that was very interesting, considering Paul is a messianic figure.
Yeah.
He's a savior. And Jesus Christ is considered a teacher. It just interested me.
Well,
Yeah.
and
The words that he chose to use.
yeah, maybe we should have said that at the beginning, that when we're saying messianic, we don't mean like Christ, we mean Savior,
Savior.
which
Yeah.
I think to parse it apart, because I think
Right.
sometimes people think one and the same. We don't mean Messiah like die on the cross for people. We mean Savior
Somebody who's coming
from
to save
oppressor
a group
of
people.
yeah, just the definitive
Yeah.
term of Messiah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we claim, or I claim to be a Christian. My messianic figure is Jesus Christ. And I used my Christian understanding of the Bible a lot in this book because of that.
Yeah.
And I drew, like I said, there's a lot of biblical references. And I could honestly, I do think that Frank Herbert was referencing the Middle East and Middle Eastern people, but I could see the Hebrew people from the Old Testament being put in here as a substitute too.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
what else did you want to add as a little bit of a piece of humor?
So this is just a point of contention with Frank Herbert. And maybe it's just because I just have read it so recently. And I know what he was trying to do. But every time he talked about the entrance of the tents.
You don't
Do you
like
know
the
what I'm
word
talking-
sphincter?
No.
Oh, yeah.
It happened like 5 or 6 times.
That's a great description.
And right, I knew what he was trying to do, but why couldn't you just do
Yeah, but what do you picture in your mind's eye when he uses that term?
The
exactly?
exact
Not a tent opening.
Well.
No, he could have used puckered, right? Puckered would have made more sense.
I don't know. It was a different time.
It was, and I'm not trying to bring potty humor into things, but just of all of the words to have picked, and again, I knew what he was doing, I knew what he was describing. It just
Wasn't your favorite word.
not at all, not at all.
What about plot? I think we've really delved into the plot. I feel like it was fine. I enjoyed it. It was easy to follow, except I struggled with the first book.
Mhm.
I struggled a long time trying to figure out what was going on. But once we got past that, once the Duke actually died, I was good.
Yeah.
Poor Duke.
I know. I felt a little bit like structurally at the beginning of each chapter, there is an excerpt from the writings of the princess Aurelian, who is also Bene Gesserit.
Yes.
And she's writing about Paul's life in little bits and pieces. And sometimes I felt like that gave away what was going to happen in the chapter.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit annoyed with that, but then sometimes I appreciated it, especially in the beginning, because I didn't understand what was going on. I tried to read this book in 2016, and I gave up in book 1 because Frank Herbert didn't do enough to make me care about anybody. I just didn't care. I just thought, why do I care? But I do have to say that this time around, once I got past that part, I was fine. It was fine. I was invested enough that I enjoyed the story.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Obviously, I loved the book.
Obviously.
And I feel like the reason why I loved it was because of the plot. I felt like there were so many little bits and pieces to grab onto and things to focus on. I liked that. It's complicated.
Yeah.
And I feel like I enjoyed the fact that it was complicated. It's not cut and dry. And like there's just a lot that goes on. The Half-Thur or Half-Fur or whatever, the Mentat, the Atreides Mentat ends up
Thufir.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Everyone knows what I mean.
Yeah.
He ends up being a Mentat to the Baron when he's captured, and that's a whole other little secondary thing because he's not very happy about that.
No, and
obviously.
he's very devious.
Yeah,
Very.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of stuff between the Emperor and the Baron,
Yes.
and inside the House Harkonnen itself, and there's a lot to grab onto. I enjoyed that. And I thought the plot developed well. The first book is a little slower and it's a little difficult to follow with what's going on. But once you get through that, and then you look back on it and you're like, oh, it was important. Like it was all critical pieces. But I think the plot is what drives this book for me. The plot and the characters. I wouldn't say the character development is great, but most characters play a significant role in driving the plot to where it needs to go.
Right.
So,
Well, and that's the good point too. This is the first of a series. So the plot sets up a lot for what's coming down the road.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I really struggled with the plot at the beginning. I think that's the most I complained about at the beach because that's where I was reading this, was that I couldn't keep my head straight about what was going on. I couldn't, for the life of me, keep all of the characters straight or all of the variables together. It took until about halfway through the book when I began to kind of get my bearings, and I still have some, I still don't know if I understand every part of it.
I don't. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I do not understand why Baron Harkonnen left Dune and why Duke Leto and his family were sent there by the Emperor, and then the Emperor turned around and helped the Baron in an uprising. I don't understand that part of it.
I think part of it was that the Emperor was aware of there being like a possible Kwisatz Haderach in the Atreides house, and so he was trying to line it up to kill them all. Like it was like some insider trading.
Okay,
that's my understanding of it.
I missed that part somewhere.
The Baron left Arrakis being fully aware that he was going to come back to it. The Emperor ordered the Baron to leave Arrakis being fully aware that he was going to come back to it. Okay. And then they just lured the Duke there saying you have to take over because I've decided the Baron has to leave. And then the Duke wants to stay on good graces with the Emperor. So he says, I have to do this.
Like he needed to.
Plus there's the whole monetary
component.
Yeah. The whole thing. Well, if we can make it work, we can get really rich off of it.
Yeah.
I feel like that was my understanding of it.
That makes sense to me. I just really struggled with the initial motivations.
Yeah.
Once things were rolling, I could buy into everything else.
Yeah.
But I'm right there with you too, Mom, of why should I care?
Yeah.
I literally have this year of why should I care about Paul?
The point is, I don't really know that you have to.
Right,
it's just like it's just the story itself.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
Mhm.
Right. And ultimately, that's going to lead us into our next category of intrigue or interest. Ultimately, for me, what was most interesting was the world building. This whole new universe and all of this religious background and this history. And then you have this, it's all focusing on this one planet and the unique planet and all the politics. And that was what I found fascinating, and it's what I appreciated. I struggled with the writing, but I did not struggle with the creativity and the imagination that went into this story.
That's what I was saying about Frank Herbert earlier, is that you can say whatever you will about his writing, which is fine, because it's not my favorite style of writing either, but you have to absolutely respect his ability to construct an entire universe with all, like, every little piece, every little complicated relationship between every little piece, and then drive it through to a conclusion.
Yeah, he definitely thought it through completely, and I have to give him props for that because it's incredible.
I think that's what makes Dune so good. It's just the completeness of the world, and I think despite the lack of description and stuff like that, I love the idea of Dune. I just think that's cool, like the desert planet that has this like gold in the form of spice that everyone's addicted to, that like
comes from the excrement
people,
of the sandworms.
This stuff that people
Gross.
fight over.
Yes.
You know, it's just, I just like that idea. It's cool. And like
fascinating.
people in robes skirting across the sand at night to not attract the worms, and you have to wear a still suit or you'll dry out. It's it's fascinating.
So, okay, I know that this came before Star Wars, but there are creatures in the desert in Star Wars that wear robes and masks.
Yes.
What are they called?
With
Please help me.
Oh, they have the helmet things on.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're not,
I don't care about
No,
Star
I
Wars.
know.
We should have the weights.
Right.
They would be able to tell us. Yeah.
But then also the little dudes.
Sand people.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what they were.
Yes. But wow.
They drove those big garbage truck machines.
those are the little ones.
Oh.
The sand people are the one, they wear like the spiky things on their head, and they like murder the merchants and stuff.
Yeah.
But the little dudes that drive the big
garbage truck
roller
things.
I was also thinking of those too, because they are robed people in the desert.
No, I really think if you read Dune and then you watch the first Star Wars movie, you would be like, wow.
It's
George Lucas
like
ripped Frank Herbert off, ripped him off, and made way more money from it.
Didn't you say you were reading Dune and thought Dune ripped off Star Wars?
Well, no, I didn't, because I
knew
knew that Dune was written well before Star Wars was a thing. Yeah. But I was reading it, and the more I thought about it, I was like, the Force and the voice, the people in the sand with like their crawler things.
Look,
the Galactic Emperor with his feared army, Sardaukar, Stormtrooper. Yeah, it's like
I can even take it further. Paul's younger sister, that was born with all the knowledge of all the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah,
she's Yoda.
Yeah, maybe.
Except she's a little bit more ornery.
I know, but I'm just saying, she's this little toddler that everybody thinks is just a little creepy and has the knowledge of the universe. Yeah.
I think Aaliyah is her name, right? I think one
Princess
of the
Leia?
Aaliyah,
Yeah,
the little girl. I think the best scene with her is right as the fighting is finished and she's the Emperor's prisoner, and then she leaves and she's like, bye, I'm gonna go kill more people.
She's the one that kills the Baron.
Yes, she does kill the Baron.
She was like, bye, I killed your grandfather, I'm gonna go kill more people. And I'm like, you are 4 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
And she knows he's her grandfather too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Part of the interest in the intrigue for me is doing exactly what we're doing right now, is taking Dune and thinking about how it has impacted the entertainment culture and how it has kind of infiltrated pop culture. I was so interested in that. I looked it up just to see what people think as far as Dune impacting our culture. And of course, Star Wars is always the first thing that's mentioned. But they also mention Mad Max.
For sure.
Oh, sure.
Because of the desert.
Yeah.
Because of the desperation of the people. They mention Avatar. because you have a planet with a native people and you have an outside group coming in because there's something on the planet that they want, and they underestimate the native people too. And there is a savior that comes and helps the Na'vi people.
That is true. Yeah. And the savior is of the other world.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
Avatar.
You're right.
Another Game of Thrones.
Oh, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to talk about that one.
That
Ned
one I don't know.
Stark
yes.
is Duke Leto.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. I thought that was fascinating.
I was going to say that earlier and didn't.
And
so.
you guys probably don't even remember this movie because you would have been too young, but there was a movie called Tremors with Kevin Bacon, and it took place out west in the desert, and there were these big worms that were coming by and eating everything.
That would be Dune.
And you couldn't walk on the ground because they felt the tremors. It was called Tremors.
That would be Dune.
Yeah. So it was just, I just thought all of that was very fascinating.
I think that's definitely part of the interest, just the little facets of it that got taken and put in everything else. Although I think Star Wars just about copied and pasted it.
Yeah, especially I say the first movie because for me, I was alive when the first Star Wars movie came out, but it's actually in the middle of the whole
thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so anything else? We have logic. I think it's a logical book. It makes sense.
What do you
me.
mean by just like
when you're reading it? Does it logically flow? Does it make sense to you? The things that are going on. It does for me, for the most part. Like I said, I was confused at the beginning, just because I don't think things were presented in a way that made it easy to understand.
Yeah.
But once the ball got rolling, everything that was happening made sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, it seems like a standard story now, but it was kind of like the first of its time then. It's just like the outsider comes and saves the day, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it, things were put together in a way that moved the story along. There were some characters that I was unsure how they fit into the larger story, but again, I'm probably not going to read the rest of the series, so I don't know if they come back. So like Duncan, Idaho.
Well, he dies.
I
now,
know.
I will say he comes back in the second book, but in a complicated way.
Okay.
Sure, but that's what I mean. Some of these characters that feel so secondary, so kind of little in the first book, I was like, what?
Yeah,
They're
I would
so
say
hard to
the
parse apart. Why am I trying?
Yeah, some of the characters, like the people in like the Duke's army, like Gurney and Duncan.
Yes.
Gurney Hallett was actually one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, he's a great character, but they're not quite as important.
No,
I don't feel
they are
right.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing, because this is logic and relationships, I do have a couple of things to say about relationships here.
Sure.
We talked about the Paul and Chani, why we struggle to feel like their relationship at the end of the book was so important. But I think also in the way in which Frank Herbert wrote the story, in which you feel very disconnected from what's going on, I felt that the relationships between all of the characters were overall not well flushed out.
No.
Or were not strong relationships. And again, that could simply be because of the disconnected writing. I think if it was more kind of a weird analogy here, but if it was like Death from The Book Thief.
Yes.
Very intimately aware of the characters, though third person, I think that would have changed some of the relationships a little bit.
Yeah, but Frank Herbert writes from like a distant third person where you're almost God way up here and you're watching all this play out way down here, and so you don't get that really intense intimate feeling of relationship.
Plus I don't know that Frank Herbert was all that concerned with, or that he cared if you felt that the characters had intimate relationships, because it was ultimately irrelevant to the story. Like the most important relationship in the book is Jessica and Paul, and that relationship is pretty well fleshed out. I feel like you have a pretty good.
It is. I wouldn't say it's a good relationship in between people to people.
I'm not saying it's a feel good relationship, but I feel like you see their progression between like mother to son, and then to like mother of the Messiah to the Messiah. Like it's like I mean, it's a weird thing. It's an outlandish idea, but I think you see that progression.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, What is your ultimate level of enjoyment for this book?
Do I go first?
You might as well. I think we already know how you feel.
Yeah.
Well, I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
If that was, are we doing a rating system?
You can. You
Yeah.
can do 8. Yep. You can do out of
Sure.
10, out of 5. Yeah.
I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think the story's phenomenal. I absolutely love the fact that it was like a seminal ground laying work for the genre that I like so much. I do think that the writing leaves some to be desired, and there are certain things that I'm like, maybe it'd be better if it was another, a different way. But overall, it's not my world; it's Frank Herbert's world. So I'm just here to look at it. But
That's a good way to put it.
overall, I would definitely. I think I would give it an 8 out of 10. I think what the book lacks for in great writing, a beautiful description, I think it makes up for in a great story with lots of little pieces to focus on, lots of little nooks and crannies.
Julia?
If I were to give this a star rating, I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Because I agree that there's so much in this to think about and talk about, and there's so much to dissect. I mean, we spent how much just talking about the plot alone?
Yeah. And we really, honestly,
Scratched the surface.
yeah, just barely.
Well, yeah, because we were like, I felt like we were describing little things, and then I would think like, oh, there's something else important that happened,
Yeah.
and there's something else. Like we didn't even talk about Paul becoming the Kwisatz Haderach, and like when he finds that out, and all, like
Yeah.
we didn't talk about the final, like we didn't,
Yeah, the battle.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we said this is a spoil. We didn't spoil it, but I feel like we talked about as much as we could. It's like,
Yeah.
if you really care, just read the book and
Right.
you'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Right.
Yes.
So I have this written on my notes that it's maybe about a 3-star. That feels a little low, so it might end up being about a 3.5-star book for me, on the sole premise that I struggled so hard to keep track of everything. And that can take away from the enjoyment of reading for me if it becomes like too much mental energy. And because we didn't find the appendix until how much later?
Yeah, if you found that in the beginning, like
It
I
would
found
be
that
helpful.
in the beginning, and I
Yeah.
feel like I had a pretty good grasp on
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you tried to read it without the appendix,
No,
it's pretty
it's not
tough.
a
It
fun
was rough.
experience.
There's a lot of words in there that don't make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I was able to, with context,
Yeah.
figure out what things meant, but the glossary was definitely helpful.
But the thing is, even with context, where you could figure out what some things meant, you're still missing details.
Right.
Where if you get the full
yeah.
the full layout from the glossary, it makes
Yeah.
much more sense.
The other thing that I'm going to, two other things here. A book this big and this intensive, I would typically fall into a reading haze after reading it, right? You spend so much time with these characters and this world that you take like maybe up to a week to process everything and not touch something else. And I am not in a reading haze, which is it's a very clear indicator to me of how much subconsciously I put into the story, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure what I'm reading next, but I'm ready to move on instead of still sitting with it.
So when you say like you're not in a haze, does that mean like you didn't care, or does that mean like you thoroughly got through it?
You processed
I would say
it
more
already?
like
You can say you didn't care; it won't hurt my feelings.
I don't know if I didn't care though. I think it's more along the line like you read a book this thick, you just spend so much time that it's in your noggin.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I think because I talked about how it would take me so long to read a passage, or I'd have to go back and reread things, or I'd find myself picking my nails, or whatever, that I think I just struggled to get into it, that I didn't give it as much mental energy as I could have. So when it finished, I didn't find all that energy was exerted.
Right.
Is I
Got
think
it.
how I'm explaining that. The other thing I will say is this has fit my kind of what I'm looking for right now. Maybe no, let me restart that. Ben and I started Game of Thrones. Partly we're getting rid of Netflix, but we also really love long form fantasy shows, and we were looking for something good and fun to watch that fit that. And we started that around the same time that I started reading Dune. And one of the things that has just kind of caught my attention in all of this is the absolute insanity of some people's creativity. You were talking about this earlier about how much detail is in this. It's reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, right? This world that is created, and I'm just awestruck that some people have this innate deep creativity to create these worlds just out of words. So I might not like the story, but I can stand in awe of this saga that was created.
Yeah.
Now, if I would interject, if I could have picked 3 books to do for this podcast, I would have picked The Lord of the Rings.
Sure. Oh, yeah. But that would take us a week to discuss.
Yeah. Well, plus, I mean, you want to talk about complicated. Like you're saying, can't keep track. The Lord of the Rings is horribly complicated.
Yeah, it is.
But I honestly think, okay, Dune.
Yeah.
If you broke it into 3 books,
that would be different.
It would feel like a Lord of the Rings experience.
Yeah, that's actually probably true.
And you could expand on some things. Like you could actually build in the reasons why the emperor and the baron want to get
why
rid
they're friendly.
of. Well, why they are working together behind the scenes to get rid of Duke Leto and his concubine and his son, and and it would be more of a Lord of the Rings kind of experience.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that up because, in my opinion, I love Dune. I think Frank Herbert is a phenomenal world builder, but I think J.R.R. Tolkien holds the. I think he holds the trophy for the most accomplished work. I mean, he wrote an entire book about the history of one of the people in the Lord of the Rings.
I think he actually lived in.
Yeah, he lived in Middle
his
Earth.
World.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful place to live.
It
is. I want to go to Hobbiton so bad. Ugh.
I liked Dune. I did not love it. I was not a fan of the writing.
Yeah.
So that dropped the star rating down for me. But I so much appreciate, like you and Mark, the world building, the detail, the creativity. So, and I also recognize its status as the OG epic science fiction novel. So I think I would give it between a 3 and a 3.5 star. I was not a fan of the writing, and that writing for me is big, and I need characters. I need characters that I don't necessarily have to care about, but that I'm invested in. Like I want to go with them on this trip, and I had a hard time with this.
I feel like I enjoyed that. I don't, not to be contrarian, but just how it's like you don't exactly know how you feel about this, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. For some reason, that makes it intriguing. Yeah. So you're doing like 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
So basically 6 or 7.
Yes. I'm not saying 3.5 out of 10.
No.
I'm doing.
So if I were to do, so if I do stars, I'm 4 out of 5, and you guys are 3 and 3. That's not so bad. You didn't hate it that much.
No. For me, a 3.5 is fine. It's fine.
Middle of the road. Yeah.
I struggle because part of it I'm very, very impressed by.
Yeah.
But my actual reading experience of it, not so fun. And I was slumpy. Like I couldn't wait to be done so I could read a book that I chose.
But kind of as what I said at the beginning, I am appreciative that you made us read this because I think it is important to learn how to talk about or talk about in general books that you struggle reading or that you don't like. Or
you think you don't like.
Right. Or was a difficult reading experience or whatever. So I'm definitely going to go and watch the movies.
Yes.
I can tell you that.
Yeah, definitely watch the movie.
Has encouraged me to watch
the movie's actually very good. They tried to make a Dune movie in the 80s.
Yeah.
But it was too complicated.
Yeah.
It came out horrible. Everyone was very disappointed in it.
They did make a movie that Sting was in. There is a Dune movie with Sting.
From the 80s? I couldn't tell you if Sting was in it or not. I just know I know that there's one. I think there's one other one, and then there's the most recent one, and the one other one was like a big flop because like the special effects were really bad and the story wasn't well done because it's like how do you fit the whole thing into one movie?
You don't.
Yeah.
You can't even really fit it into a book, like I've been saying.
Yeah. I am interested to see how they're going to do 2 movies, though.
I think it's if you want, you see, because you didn't watch the first one.
Not yet.
I think if you watch the first one, it'll make a lot of sense.
And I don't doubt that. I just, as I'm reading it, it felt like the middle book was a little slow at times. So I'm very curious how they're going to.
I could just tell you,
together.
unless you don't want me to spoil it.
I
for you.
liked that.
Okay.
I liked the middle book. I liked the part where Paul is learning to ride the worm, and they're learning to be part of that community and what that meant.
I agree. So I'm just interested to see where the stopping point is going to be and all of that. So I know you can tell me, but I want to watch it myself.
It makes a lot of sense when you watch it.
Sure. I don't doubt that.
One thing I'm very excited for is Javier Bardem plays Stilgar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And
Zendaya is Chani.
And oh my word, what is her name? Florence Pugh. I'm a fan of her.
She plays Irulan.
Yes, Princess Irulan. So I'm excited about that.
Irulan, whatever. Just,
oh my word.
Some of the times I just I read the book and I just skip over it.
I know.
I know who that is. I know who that is.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't need to pronounce it in my head.
You want to bring us around, Julia?
I will try to pull us from the outskirts of the galaxy. So I guess, Mom, you haven't had much of your mojito.
I haven't, because I've been busy talking.
Well, then.
Everybody else is.
You got to stay hydrated.
I know. Which they were good mojitos, by the way.
Mock mojitos.
Yeah, mock.
Yes.
Not from scratch.
No. Oh, well. Oh, well. Well, we have definitely had a very dense conversation about Dune.
Fun. I had fun. Thanks, Mark, for picking it up.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I've said, I think, from the get-go, this was going to be a very fun podcast because of all of the different thoughts and perspectives that we were going to bring to this story. And I think it's so interesting that you really, really like this and how that has impacted or influenced your understanding of the story to a degree better than maybe you and I, Mom, because we had a little bit of a harder time getting into it.
Right. Well, we didn't have the level of interest.
Yeah, and I also feel like because I was so into it, I mean, I read it in 2 days, because I was so interested or into it, I was willing to overlook the little bits that were annoying, like little writing hiccups that were, I'll just skim past that and just,
But that's so true. We all have books that are not technically well written that we absolutely love, and we're willing to forgive all of the things that are problematic because the things that we love, we really love. Yeah. So I understand that, and I certainly don't hold a grudge. I know a lot of people that give Dune 5 stars. It's one of their favorite books of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you for this challenge.
Absolutely.
And thanks for chatting with us this evening. It has been a very fun way to spend a Friday night.
Yes. I think so.
Yeah. Well, friends, if you have stuck with us this long, gold star, drink a mojito. We are very curious to know if you've read this book, if you've seen the movie. What are your thoughts on Dune? I know we posted on Instagram in the past week, and somebody responded and said that they loved the movies, and we're excited to hear this episode. So definitely let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Instagram and on Facebook.
Yes. Please
bombard us with all of your Dune related stuff. Our next episode that will drop after this is our quarterly review. Again, that comes every quarter. That's in the name.
Yep. Quarterly reading wrap up.
Yes. Where we will talk about our reading experiences from April, May, and June.
Yes.
So join us then when we do that. And for now, friends, I think that's all from us.
Yes.
Thank you for hanging out with us. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review, share us with your friends, and join us next time here at the Book Snug. Thank you for joining us today.
Bye, friends. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the BookSnug_podcast on Instagram and at the BookSnug podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.budsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, so famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me," and we wholeheartedly agree.